Round penning is the first of our groundwork exercises and is very important because it introduces to our horse that we are having an interaction with them and we have an expectation that they will respond to us. I like to start here with all horses that are new to me because it's very safe for me and for them. I'm not attached to the horse by anything, so I can't be dragged, and the space is large enough to get the horse away from me if necessary, but small enough to be able to apply pressure without losing the connection. The actions that we ask the horse to do during a round penning session perfectly align with the exercises that we'll practice once we put a halter and lead rope on. There's a lot of foreshadowing here, and you'll see in other exercises, the horse will be prepared to give to our pressure based on what they learn here in the round pen. I'll be discussing multiple details in this video, so we'll pause it and back it up as many times as necessary to help you really understand how to apply this exercise. There are 3 goals that we want to accomplish here in the round pen. The first is to introduce pressure and release to our horse. We use pressure to motivate our horse to take action, and once they have responded correctly, we release the pressure to communicate that they have taken the action that we wanted. This goal has 2 benefits. The first is to get the horse used to feeling pressure coming from us and responding but not overreacting. And the second is to allow us to practice applying pressure in varying degrees of intensity and releasing it at the appropriate time. Pressure in this exercise has 3 different forms. The first is the point. I'll stand in the round pen facing my horse, holding my stick in the hand nearest to the horse's hindquarters. So if the horse is looking to my left, I'll hold the stick in my right hand. My pointing hand is the first indication of pressure. I point with my whole arm to be sure that the horse can see the change in my body language. I point in the direction I want my horse to travel. The next level of pressure is 3 clucks with my mouth. It's pressure in the form of sound and translates wonderfully to when I'm riding. The next level of pressure is swinging my stick and string, spanking the ground. This form of pressure utilizes movement and sound to increase the intensity to motivate my horse to take action. The action I'm looking for is forward movement at an increased pace in the direction I'm pointing. As soon as the horse gives me the action I'm after, I stop all pressure. No more spanking, clucking, or pointing. I go to neutral body language. Neutral is the release that we're practicing giving to our horse when they find the right answer to our pressure. Once we've introduced pressure and release, our next goal is to teach our horse safe turns. We want our horse to always turn toward us in the round pen. We will use correct positioning as well as contrast and consequences to achieve this goal. If our horse turns out and shows us their hind end, we will increase pressure and make it clear that a resting period is associated with turning correctly. The third goal in the round pen is to link up with our horse. This goal signifies the end of the round penning session and is all about timing our release to show our horse that the place to be is with us. Linking up helps us to apply pressure and release it in a way that gets immediate results. If we aren't getting the link up, then there's a problem with the way that we're applying pressure and, more importantly, the way that we're releasing it. To get this exercise started, you'll see that I take a step to the side to get my body positioned behind the horse's drive line. Then I apply pressure to send her off. As she moves, I'll continue to adjust my position relative to her. In the equine perception module, we broke down the concept of the drive line and what sort of reactions we can expect based on pressure relative to it. You'll remember that any pressure we apply behind the drive line will cause the horse to increase speed or yield the hindquarters. As she moves around us, I will follow with my buckle pointed toward her hindquarters, well behind the drive line. If I get too far in front of her, my pressure will cause her to stop and turn. Let's start at the beginning again and watch for the increasing levels of pressure and release. After I position myself appropriately behind her drive line, I begin to apply pressure to get her to move forward. My goal is to send her in the direction I want, up to the gait that I want. My first request is up to a trot, so I begin applying pressure by pointing in the direction I want her to travel. She took my pointing as enough pressure to get moving, so I release the pressure as soon as she responds. I stop pointing. She stops, so I point again and cluck 3 times to bring her up to a lope. She lopes, and I stop pointing and clucking. Then she slows down again, so I point, cluck, and spank the ground until she lopes. The order of the sequence is very important. I think of it as an ask, tell, and make. The ask is the point. If she responds, then I will not increase the pressure. If she doesn't respond, then I'll increase the pressure by clucking. This is the tell. If she still doesn't respond, I will continue increasing the pressure until I get the response that I'm looking for. I will stack the pressure and maintain it to get her to make the decision to increase speed. Point, cluck, spank in that order and on top of each other until she changes gait to a lope. And then stop everything. Let's go back and watch it again. Pressure, release. Pressure, pressure, release. Pressure, 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 release. The next goal is getting her to change directions. A proper direction change will occur when she turns into me and changes direction without ever turning her hind end toward me. We are building a foundation with our horse based on safety, and turning her hind end toward me is not safe. So to initiate a turn, I will utilize the drive line again and step out in front of it. As predicted, this causes her to stop. Then I back up, give her space to turn toward me, and send her off the other direction. An important part of teaching a proper turn is to increase speed just prior to turning. We increase pressure, asking for a lope prior to each turn. If she turns towards me, then I will allow her to trot off at a reduced speed and she gets a break. If she ever turned out and showed me her hind end, I would cut her off and send her back the original direction at a faster pace than the lope that we're asking for here. I would make her hustle a little bit. This clarifies for her that showing her hind end to me will cause more work than turning toward me politely. Without creating a contrast in consequences, it would be very confusing to her. So before she turns, I increase speed. She turns properly, I reduce speed. She turns improperly, I increase speed even further. So each time I ask for a turn, I bring her speed up. Step out in front of her. As she turns properly, she goes off in a trot. Increase speed. Step out. Off at a trot. Increase speed. Step out. Off at a trot. Increase speed. Step out. Off at a trot. The final goal of our round penning session is to link up with our horse. Just like when we're changing directions, we increase speed prior to initiating the link up to create contrast. When we finish the session, we'll take a final step out in front of the drive line, but instead of asking for a change in direction, we'll invite her to come into us. We do that by releasing pressure. As soon as she turns toward us, we look away. This gives her the ability to come into us. As she gets closer, I'll pick up the halter and walk away from her, giving her even more of a release. I can then place the halter on and move on to other exercises. Let's review our goals for our round penning session. The first goal is to get a response to the pressure that we apply. We want to use as little pressure as necessary to get our intended response. This is why we start with very light pressure and increase systematically until we get the response we want. We have to communicate that we want something before we can demand it. The softer we start applying pressure, the softer our horses will be. This concept of applying light pressure first and increasing until we get a result will be used in all of our exercises. Practicing here in the round pen will get us very skilled at being very clear in our communication with our horse. This is why we choose to start our communication with something as minimal as pointing. If we ever hope to have a horse respond to that very light pressure, we have to consistently start there and prove to them that we will release there as well if they give us the response we want. We have to give them the ability to beat us to the next increase in pressure. If we point and they increase speed, there will be no need for clucking or spanking the ground. But we also have to prove to them that if they don't respond to our lightest pressure, then our pressure will increase. If we point and they don't increase speed, we will indeed cluck and then spank the ground until they increase speed. Consistency here is king and queen and everything in between. Our next goal is to get a safe change in direction. Some of the best weapons horses have are their back feet. They can deliver devastating, life-ending kicks with those back feet, and we need to practice having them aim that hind end in a safe direction at all times. Our goal is to have our horse get into the habit of always turning toward us. We use pressure to increase speed and release to reduce speed to help them understand this message. The last goal of our round penning session is the link up. Once our horse has had a sufficient exercise session, they will be looking for a rest. We use release to offer being near us as the best resting spot. Just one round penning session is full of multiple repetitions of each of these skills. This kind of organized and pre-planned training is what safe horsemanship is built on. We are laying brick after brick of safety foundation in our training program. Now let's introduce an untrained horse. She has never been in the round pen, so she has no idea what I want when I point. This is not surprising, so I increase pressure to motivate her to take action so I can give her the release and start teaching her what the point means. Here we go with the point. She doesn't understand. We introduce clucking and spanking, off she goes, and we release. Our goal here is to establish her understanding of the point, which means go in the direction I'm pointing. So here, when she stops and tries to change direction, I step in front of her drive line and point again, and I release as soon as she goes in the correct direction. She comes to a stop here, so I point again, and instead of moving off, she tries to change directions. I cut her off and add pressure to motivate her to make the correct choice. At this point, I'm a little bit behind her, and I have to hustle to get out of her way as she comes around. If I don't move quickly, I will end up being in front of her drive line and causing her to stop or turn, likely away from me. Once I regain my proper position, I increase speed to practice again her response to my point. We'll do this a number of times. We're just practicing the concept of increased speed when I point. I'm introducing the concept of pressure to her and looking for the response. When I get the correct answer, I'm releasing the pressure. We are both practicing here, using pressure and release. She's getting used to experiencing pressure, and I'm working on releasing at the correct time. The moment that she tries is my release point. If I continue adding pressure after she has responded correctly by increasing speed, lots of things can go wrong. She may panic because there's no way for her to get away from the pressure, and this is the opposite of what we want to teach her. These practice sessions are as much for the handler as they are for the horse. Learning to release when the horse gives the answer you want is the most important skill you can achieve to communicate with your horse in a way they actually understand. She's consistently responding to my pressure, so we'll move on to turns. I step out in front of her drive line and back up to give her space to turn. At the same time, I will switch the stick to the other hand so that as she turns, the stick remains ready to apply pressure behind her drive line. If I didn't make the change of hands with my stick as she turns, it would be in the wrong place, applying the wrong pressure, and it would surely confuse her into making the wrong turn. Now that she's going the opposite direction, we will practice increasing speed on this side. She hasn't seen this exercise from her right eye yet, so we need to give her a chance to learn it all over again on this side of her body. A common mistake that people often make is assuming that a horse will understand an exercise equally on both sides of their body. The general rule is that you have to teach both sides independently. You cannot assume, since you taught an exercise on the left side of the horse, that the right side of the horse will understand it. On the contrary, you should assume that the two different sides do not communicate well, and you need to take the time to teach each exercise to both sides of your horse. Once we feel like she's got a pretty good understanding of accepting pressure from the right side of her body, we can work on turns again. We use our formula of increasing speed first, then stepping out in front of her drive line, backing up to make space, switching hands with our stick, pointing in the right direction, and moving out of the way so that we're not in front of her drive line. As you can see, there was an opportunity here for me to have really gotten in her way and confused her, but we're doing a little spiral so that I can continue to stay behind her driveline. We will continue practicing safe turns, increasing and releasing pressure, as well as positioning ourselves in the right place. Proper position as it relates to the horse's driveline is a huge part of getting quality sessions in the round pen. Back to the concept that horses are prey animals, they are always reading the body language of the animals around them, ourselves included. The arm I use to point, the hand I hold my stick in, the angle of my hips and shoulders, and the movement of my feet are all important in this exercise, and our horses are keenly aware of all of it. You'll see that I am always walking a little bit forward when I'm applying pressure. In this way, I am driving this exercise in a position of leadership as opposed to backing up while the horse is circling around me. There's a big difference in terms of hierarchy in the way we move our feet. Typically, the leader will move forward and control the flow of energy, which is exactly what we're doing here. The only time that I walk away from the horse is to create space to invite them to come toward me. Each time we practice turning or increasing speed, I am proving to my horse that I'm a fair and predictable leader with clear boundaries and an awareness of their willingness to give to my pressure. I am creating a foundation of experience for my horse that proves to them that I will release pressure if they give to it. I am not overly dominating, and I am not passive in my message either. On this turn, my body position was not far enough on the outside to give her space to turn in. She gets a little confused and turns the wrong way, showing me her hind end. I cut her off and sent her back in the original direction to show her that was the wrong choice. On the very next turn, she corrects the mistake and enjoys a well-earned rest. We will practice a few more turns so that she can feel the contrast between the release of pressure for a proper turn and the increased pressure from a turn to the outside. Without making mistakes, she cannot understand what the consequences of making a mistake will be. Having at least one mistake where she turns out is actually quite important so that she can feel the difference between working harder after an outside turn and getting a rest after every single inside turn. Without that contrast, we cannot ensure that she has learned the lesson. By witnessing her make a mistake and providing fair and safe consequences, we are communicating with her in her language how to behave around people in a domestic environment. This is so important for her lifelong success with us. A horse that is respectful of our space and careful with its body, not putting people in dangerous situations, is a horse that can be enjoyed by many people. The experience that they will ultimately have with people will likely be one of joy and partnership and having their needs met. At least they will have a better chance at that kind of life than a horse that is always on the defensive or even aggressive spectrum of behavior. At this point in our round penning session with this young horse, we have achieved all of the goals except linking up. So I'm looking for a moment to invite her in. I'm going to increase speed a couple times to create that contrast and then invite her into my space by releasing all of the pressure. I increase speed, then I'll step out in front of her driveline, and as soon as she stops and looks at me, I turn away, removing all the pressure. Then I'll work my way toward her hind end to see if I can get a hindquarter yield. If she doesn't yield her hip by stepping it away or turning her shoulders toward me, I will drive her off and try again. Once again, I will increase speed to create the contrast, step out, and turn away when she stops. Then I'll work my way toward her hip to get a yield. If it doesn't work, I'll drive her off again. These failures are actually successes in disguise because she is learning what happens if she doesn't yield her hip. She doesn't know that that's what I want yet, but the pressure of driving her off will motivate her to find the answer to get the release. It's important to take the time it takes here and go through the amount of repetitions it requires. If you have the correct position, you are applying and releasing the correct amount of pressure, and you are repeating with consistency, the horse will figure out the best place to rest is near you. There is no frustration in this exercise, just the application of pressure to send them off if they ignore you and the release of pressure when your horse turns to face you. It will click eventually. Having a certain set of expectations on how long it will take or the number of repetitions it will require is a recipe for failure. Success in this exercise comes down to applying pressure when the horse ignores you and releasing it when they face you. Again, I increase speed, apply pressure to create the contrast so that when I step out in front of her and she looks at me, I can remove all of that pressure. Again, I'll work my way to her hip to see if I can get a yield. If she ignores me, I will apply pressure and try again. Increase speed to create contrast again, step out and walk away as soon as she looks at me. There was the first time that she actually came toward me, so I will release even further to make it clear that I want her to come in. Now I'll make my way to her hip to see if I can get a yield. I lost her attention there for a moment, so I just stepped back to recapture it. And then I move away when she looks at me. This gave her the space to keep coming towards me. So each time she looks at me, I'm going to look away. I'm still looking for a yield or to bring her shoulders toward me. So she's giving me both. This is fantastic. Again, I lost her attention and I got it back. And I reward that attention by looking away from her. Here she gets a rub and a rest for just sharing space with me. Now I'll remove even more pressure by leaving her to go get the halter. And as you can see, she's taking up that space. I want to put the halter on, but I'm going to approach her in an arc to see if I can get a hindquarter yield and keep her connected to me. She's obviously figuring out that I am a good place to rest.